I was 3 days away from losing everything I'd built over 5 years when an envelope appeared in my school mailbox. Inside was a cashier's check for $100,000, the exact amount needed to save our music program. No name, no note, just the anonymous gift that would change dozens of children's lives. I had to find this mysterious donor to say thank you. I never imagined that the person who made the donation would be capable of this, and the reason would take my breath away. Before we dive in, I'm curious, did you have music class back at school? Drop it in the comments below. And if you love stories about unexpected kindness and the healing power of community, please subscribe so you don't miss our next one. Now, let me take you back to the day my world fell apart. The email from Principal Davidson arrived at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in February, and I knew before opening it that my life was about to change. The subject line read, "Budget meeting follow-up, urgent." In 5 years of teaching music at Lincoln Elementary School in suburban Ann Arbor, Michigan, I'd learned that emails with all caps urgent never contained good news. I was sitting at my desk in the music room, surrounded by the organized chaos that defined my workspace. Stacks of sheet music, bins of rhythm instruments, a donated upright piano that was slightly out of tune but still produced beautiful sounds in the right hands. 23 third graders had just left after an enthusiastic, if imperfect, rendition of "This Land Is Your Land," and the room still hummed with the energy of children discovering their voices. I opened the email. "Greta, I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. The board has made decisions about the music and arts programs that we need to discuss. Please don't share this with students or parents until after our meeting. Principal Davidson." My hands went cold. I'd seen the budget reports. I'd attended the community meetings where concerned parents asked about potential cuts. But I'd convinced myself that our program would be spared. We were good at what we did. Our spring concerts filled the auditorium. Our students consistently scored well on state assessments. We mattered. I looked around my classroom, at the recorders hanging in neat rows, at the posters showing the families of instruments, at the handmade "Music is Life" banner my students had created last year. Everything in this room represented years of careful building, of grant writing, of personal money spent on supplies when the budget ran short. This couldn't be happening. That night, I barely slept. I kept running through arguments in my head, preparing my defense of the program. Music wasn't a luxury, it was essential. Studies showed that children who participated in music education performed better academically, developed stronger social skills, and showed increased creativity and emotional intelligence. We weren't just teaching kids to play instruments, we were teaching them discipline, teamwork, and the joy of creating something beautiful together. But I knew how budget meetings worked. When money was tight, programs like mine were always the first to go. Math and reading were core subject. Music was considered expendable, a nice extra that schools could do without when financial realities demanded sacrifice. The next morning, I arrived at Principal Davidson's office 15 minutes early. Margaret Davidson had been principal at Lincoln for 8 years, and we'd always had a good working relationship. She understood the value of arts education and had fought for my program before. But when I saw her face as she gestured for me to sit down, I knew that this time she'd lost the fight. "Greta, I'm so sorry," she began, and those 4 words told me everything. "The board met last night and made the final decision. Due to state funding cuts and increased operational costs, we're eliminating the music program effective at the end of the school year." The room seemed to tilt. Eliminated? Completely? I fought for you, I promise. I presented all the data, all the research about music education's impact on academic performance, but the numbers are brutal. We're facing an $800,000 shortfall, and we can't cut teaching positions for core subjects or essential support staff. "How much would it cost to keep the program?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady despite the panic rising in my chest. Margaret consulted her notes. "Your salary, benefits, supplies, instrument maintenance, and the space allocation, approximately $100,000 annually." $100,000. It might as well have been $1 million. "I have 8 weeks," I said. It wasn't a question. Until the end of March. I'm so sorry, Greta. If there was any other way. I left her office in a daze, walking back to my classroom through hallways decorated with student artwork, past bulletin boards announcing the upcoming spring concert. How was I supposed to tell my students that this would be their last semester of music class? How could I explain to the fifth graders in the advanced ensemble that there would be no middle school music program for them to transition into? My first class of the day was fourth grade general music. 24 bright faces looked up as I entered, ready to learn, completely unaware that their teacher was dying inside. "Good morning, Miss Thompson," they chorused. "Good morning, musicians," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "Today we're going to learn about dynamics, the volume of music and how it creates emotion." As I taught them about crescendos and diminuendos, about the power of sound to communicate feelings that words couldn't express, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this program die without a fight. If the school board couldn't find the money, I would find it myself. That afternoon, I sat down with a notebook and started making a plan. I had 8 weeks to raise $100,000. It seemed impossible, but I'd seen communities rally around causes before. Maybe, just maybe, if I could show people how much this program mattered, they would help save it. I created a crowdfunding page that evening, pouring everything into the description. Stories of students who'd found confidence through music, data about academic improvement, testimonials from parents. I set the goal at $100,000 and hit publish with a prayer. Then I got to work. I organized a bake sale. I planned a car wash. I reached out to every local business, every community organization, every church and civic group I could think of. I stood outside grocery stores on weekends with collection jars. I wrote grants to every foundation that had even a remote connection to arts education. The response was modest. People were sympathetic, certainly. They donated $20 here, $50 there. Local businesses contributed what they could. But Ann Arbor was an expensive place to live, and most families were dealing with their own financial pressures. After 3 weeks of exhausting effort, I'd raised $8,400. It was nowhere near enough. But the biggest obstacle to my fundraising campaign wasn't just money. It was Harold Brennan. Harold lived in a large Victorian house directly opposite Lincoln Elementary, and for the past 2 years, he'd been the school's most persistent complaint. Every single day, without fail, he called the office to report the intolerable noise coming from our music program. "The screeching starts at 9 in the morning and doesn't stop until 3. He'd tell whoever answered the phone, his voice sharp with irritation. "I'm an elderly man trying to enjoy my retirement in peace, and I'm subjected to this constant racket. It's harassment." I'd tried to be understanding. I'd adjusted practice schedules, moved the most challenging classes to rooms on the opposite side of the building, and even soundproofed the music room as much as our limited budget allowed. Nothing satisfied him. He'd appeared at school board meetings, standing up during public comment periods to deliver passionate speeches about property values and quality of life. He'd even threatened to sue the school district for creating a public nuisance. The irony wasn't lost on me that my program was being cut while simultaneously being accused of being too loud and too expensive. Harold Brennan was getting exactly what he wanted, and he didn't even know it yet. "Why is that man so angry?" my student, Emily, asked one day after Harold had called to complain about our second grade recorder unit. "I don't know," I said, watching through the window as Harold stood on his porch, arms crossed, glaring at the school. "But I'm too busy trying to save this program to worry about one grumpy neighbor." 4 weeks into my fundraising campaign, I'd raised $12,000. I was nowhere close to my goal, and the deadline was approaching with terrifying speed. I started having dreams about the moment I'd have to tell my students their program was ending, about packing up my classroom, about what I'd do next. I'd been a music teacher my entire adult life. It wasn't just my job, it was my identity, my purpose, my contribution to the world. The thought of losing it felt like losing a part of myself. On a cold Monday morning in late March, with only 3 days left until the school board's final deadline, I arrived at school before sunrise to set up for an early rehearsal with the 5th grade ensemble. The building was dark and quiet, the hallways echoing with my footsteps. I unlocked my classroom and turned on the lights, mentally preparing for another day of trying to teach while carrying the weight of impending loss. Then I checked my mailbox in the main office, and everything changed. There was an envelope in my box. It was a plain white business envelope, but even before I opened it, something about it felt significant. The paper was expensive, substantial. My name was written on the front in careful, old-fashioned handwriting, Ms. Greta Thompson, Music Department. Inside was a cashier's check made out to Lincoln Elementary School music program. The amount was $100,000. I stared at it, certain I was hallucinating. I looked at the check again, studying every detail. It was real. It was dated yesterday. And there was absolutely no indication of who had sent it. My hands started shaking. I looked around the empty office, as if the mysterious donor might suddenly appear, but there was only silence and the soft hum of the heating system. Someone had just saved my program. Someone had given enough money to fund it for an entire year, giving us time to find sustainable long-term solutions. And they'd done it anonymously, expecting nothing in return. I thought about all the fundraising I'd done, all the people I'd approached for donations. Who among them had this kind of money, and why wouldn't they want credit for such an incredible gift? When Principal Davidson arrived an hour later, I was waiting in her office with the check. "Marguerite, you need to see this." She looked at the check, then at me, then at the check again. "Is this real?" "I think so. It was in my mailbox this morning." "Who sent it?" "I don't know. There's no name, no note, nothing." Margaret picked up her phone and called the bank listed on the check. After a brief conversation confirming that yes, the check was legitimate, and yes, it would clear, she hung up and looked at me with wonder. "Greta, someone just saved your program. Someone in this community cared enough to make this happen." "I know," I said, "and I have to find them. I have to say thank you." The first thing I did was examine the envelope more carefully. The handwriting was distinctive, old-fashioned cursive with elegant loops and careful spacing. This was someone who'd learned penmanship when it was still considered an essential skill, probably someone elderly. The envelope had no return address and no postmark because it had been hand-delivered. I checked with the school secretary, Mrs. Cameron, who'd opened the building that morning. "I got here at 6:30, she said, "but I didn't see anyone near your mailbox. Maybe they came when I was in the restroom." I requested access to the school's security footage. Lincoln Elementary had cameras at all the main entrances, and I spent my lunch period reviewing the early morning footage with the assistant principal, Mr. Walsh. "There," I said, pointing at the timestamp, 6:47 a.m. "Someone's walking up to the main entrance." The figure was bundled in a heavy coat and hat, making identification difficult. They approached the door, opened it. He walked to the teacher's mailbox, slid the envelope into my mailbox, and then walked away, staying in the shadows where the camera's resolution was poorest. "Can't make out who it is," Mr. Walsh said, "but whoever they are, they knew how to avoid the cameras." Over the next few days, I became obsessed with identifying my mysterious benefactor. I made lists of everyone who donated to the fundraiser, looking for anyone who might have the financial means to make such a gift. I cross-referenced them with people who'd shown particular interest in the program. I visited the bank where the cashier's check had been issued, but they politely informed me that they couldn't disclose information about the purchaser without a court order. "I just want to thank them," I pleaded with the manager. "I understand, Ms. Thompson, but our client's privacy is paramount." I was stuck. And then something interesting happened. Harold Brennan stopped calling to complain. For 2 years, he'd been a constant presence. Phone calls, letters, appearances at public meetings. But after the morning I found the envelope, the complaints suddenly ceased. He was still visible in his house across the street, still occasionally standing on his porch watching the school, but the angry phone calls stopped. It seems like an odd coincidence. On a Thursday afternoon, I was leaving school late after an extended rehearsal with the ensemble when I noticed something. Harold was on his porch, and he was watching the students leaving the building with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. It wasn't anger or irritation. It looked almost like longing. On impulse, I crossed the street and walked up his driveway. He saw me coming and immediately went inside, but not before I noticed something on the small table next to his rocking chair, a distinctive fountain pen with an ornate silver cap, the same style of pen that might have written the careful, old-fashioned cursive on my envelope. My heart started racing. It couldn't be, could it? I knocked on his door. No answer. I knocked again. "Mr. Brennan, I know you're in there. I just want to talk to you for a minute." Still nothing, but I could see movement through the frosted glass window in the door. "Please, I'm not here to argue about the music program. I need to ask you something." The door finally opened a crack. Harold Brennan looked older than I'd realized, probably in his late 70s, with deep wrinkles and tired eyes that seemed to carry decades of sadness. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "That fountain pen on your porch, is that the pen you use for important correspondence?" His face changed, a flash of something, fear, guilt, crossing his features. "Why are you asking about my pen?" "Because I received an envelope 3 days ago with handwriting that looks exactly like it might have come from a pen like that. And I noticed that your complaints about the music program stopped the same day that envelope appeared." Harold's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Mr. Brennan, did you donate $100,000 to save our music program?" For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then, to my surprise, his eyes filled with tears. "You should go," he said, his voice breaking. "Please, just go." "Not until you tell me the truth. If you saved our program, I need to know why. For 2 years, you've done everything possible to shut us down. You've complained, you've threatened legal action, you've told everyone who would listen that we're a nuisance, and then you anonymously donate the exact amount needed to keep us running?" "It's complicated," he whispered. "Then uncomplicate it for me. Please. I've been searching for my donor for days, trying to understand who would make such an incredible gift. If it was you, I need to know why." Harold stood there in his doorway, an old man visibly struggling with something heavy and painful. Finally, he stepped back and opened the door wider. "You'd better come in." Harold Brennan's home was like stepping into a time capsule. The furniture was old but well-maintained, the kind of solid, quality pieces that had been built to last. Photographs covered every surface, an entire life documented in frames of various sizes and styles. But what struck me most was the music. Not playing music, the house was silent, but evidence of music everywhere. A violin case sat on a shelf, sheet music was stacked on a side table, and on the mantel, above the fireplace, was a photograph that made me stop breathing. It showed a woman, blonde, probably in her 50s, with kind eyes and a warm smile, standing in front of a classroom full of children. She was holding a recorder and wearing a shirt that said, "Music is life." "Who is that?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. Harold walked over to the photograph and picked it up, holding it with a gentleness that spoke of habit, of having touched this frame thousands of times. "That's Mary, my wife. She taught music at Lincoln Elementary for 32 years. The pieces began clicking into place. "Mary Brennan, she retired about 5 years ago, right before I was hired." "She didn't retire," Harold said quietly. "She got sick. She wanted to keep teaching, fought to stay in the classroom as long as she could. But eventually the treatments made it impossible. She passed away 3 years ago this April." I felt tears welling in my own eyes. "I'm so sorry." "The music program was her life," Harold continued, still holding the photograph. She would come home every day with stories about her students, about the little breakthroughs and victories, a shy child finding their voice through singing, a troubled kid learning discipline through learning an instrument. She believed that music could save people, could heal wounds that nothing else could touch. He carefully placed the photograph back on the mantel. After she died, I couldn't bear hearing the music from the school. Every note was a reminder of what I'd lost. Every time I heard children singing, I heard her voice teaching them, encouraging them. The joy in that building felt like an insult to my grief. So I complained. I called and I wrote letters and I tried to make it stop, because stopping the music felt like the only way to stop the pain. "But you donated to save the program," I said softly. Harold walked to the window that overlooked the school. "I was having breakfast when I saw your crowdfunding page shared on the neighborhood Facebook group. Someone had posted about how the music program was being cut, about how you were trying to raise money to save it, and I thought, good, finally the noise will stop. Finally, I'll have peace." He turned back to face me, tears streaming down his weathered face. "But then I kept reading. I read the stories you'd posted about students whose lives had been changed by music. I saw the photographs of children holding instruments, their faces lit up with pride and joy. And I realized those were the same stories Mary used to tell me, the same joy she'd spent her entire career creating. I spent 2 days arguing with myself. Part of me wanted the music to stop because hearing it hurt too much, but the bigger part, the part that loved Mary and honored her memory, knew that shutting down that program would be destroying everything she'd worked for. It would be like erasing her legacy, silencing the joy she'd brought to thousands of children over 32 years. "So you made the donation." I made the donation. Mary and I never had children of our own. We'd saved carefully, lived modestly. When she died, she left me with more money than I'd ever need for the rest of my life. And I realized that money should go toward continuing her work, toward keeping music alive in that building she loved so much. But why anonymously? Why not let people know? The program could be named after her. We could honor her memory. Because I'm ashamed. For 2 years, I've been the angry old man complaining about the music program, trying to shut down the very thing my wife dedicated her life to building. I've been cruel and petty and selfish. I don't deserve recognition. I just wanted to make sure Mary's legacy lived on, even if no one knows it was me who made it possible. I walked over to where he stood and, after a moment's hesitation, took his hand. "Mr. Brennan, Harold, thank you. Thank you for saving our program. Thank you for honoring Mary's memory. And thank you for sharing her story with me." He squeezed my hand, crying openly now. "Will you tell them? Tell the students about her? Tell them that their music program survived because, once upon a time, there was a teacher who believed music could change the world, one child at a time?" "I'll do better than that," I said. "If you'll let me, I'd like to dedicate our spring concert to Mary. I want the students to know whose legacy they're carrying forward." Harold's face crumpled with emotion. She would have loved that. 3 weeks later, the Lincoln Elementary auditorium was packed for our spring concert. The program notes included a special dedication. "This concert is dedicated to Mary Brennan, who taught music at Lincoln Elementary for 32 years and touched countless lives with her passion, dedication, and unwavering belief that every child deserves the gift of music. Thanks to an anonymous donation made in her honor, the Lincoln Elementary music program will continue bringing joy, learning, and artistic expression to our students for years to come." Harold sat in the front row, a seat I'd personally reserved for him. As the concert began, I watched his face as 200 children, from squeaky third-grade recorders to the polished fifth-grade ensemble, filled the auditorium with sound. He cried through most of it, but they weren't tears of grief anymore. They were tears of joy, of pride, of connection to something larger than his own pain. After the concert, something beautiful happened. Students lined up to shake Harold's hand, not knowing who he was, but sensing that he was important. Parents thanked him for attending, and slowly, hesitantly, Harold began to smile, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen on his face. "Mr. Brennan," I said as the crowd was dispersing, "would you like to see Mary's old classroom? I've been using it, but I'd love to show you how we've kept some of her teaching materials, her organization system." His eyes lit up. "I'd like that very much." As we walked through the quiet school, Harold told stories about Mary, about her terrible jokes that somehow always made students laugh, about her patience with struggling learners, about her conviction that there was no such thing as a child who couldn't learn to love music. She used to say that music was the universal language, that it could cross any barrier, heal any wound, connect any two people. I didn't really understand what she meant until I lost her. Only then did I realize that music wasn't just sound. It was a way of remembering, of connecting to joy even in the midst of grief. We reached the music room, and I unlocked the door. Harold stepped inside and stood very still, looking around at the instruments, the posters, the organized chaos that defined the space. "It looks almost exactly the same, like she just stepped out for a moment." "Her spirit is still here," I said, "in every child who discovers they can sing, in every struggling student who finds confidence through learning an instrument. You kept that alive, Harold. You honored her in the most meaningful way possible." 6 months later, Harold had become a regular presence at Lincoln Elementary. He volunteered as a concert usher and helped students practice their instruments after school. The angry, complaining neighbor had transformed into the program's most passionate supporter, and in doing so, he'd found a way to stay connected to his late wife's memory that brought him joy instead of pain. On the anniversary of Mary's death, we held a special ceremony unveiling a plaque in the music room, the Mary Brennan Music Room, where every child finds their voice. Harold stood beside me as we pulled away the covering, and I saw him mouth words I recognized as something Mary must have said often. "Music is life." She was right, I told him. Music is life. It's memory, it's healing, it's connection. And thanks to you, her gift will keep giving to children for generations. Harold squeezed my shoulder. "No, Miss Thompson. Thanks to you. You fought for this program when it would have been easier to give up. You showed me that Mary's work was worth preserving. You reminded me that grief doesn't have to mean shutting down joy. It can mean finding new ways to celebrate the people we love." As I watched him interact with students after the ceremony, smiling, encouraging, sharing Mary's wisdom, I thought about the mysterious envelope that had appeared in my mailbox months ago. An anonymous gift from an unlikely source had saved our program, but it had done something else too. It had shown me that the people who seem most hostile might simply be people in pain. That sometimes the loudest complaints come from the deepest grief, and that when we look past the surface, we often find stories of love, loss, and the desperate human need to hold on to what matters most. Harold Brennan had saved our music program, but in doing so, he'd also saved himself, finding a way back to joy, back to connection, back to the legacy of the woman he loved. And every time I hear children making music in that room, I think of Mary, who believed in its power to change lives. She was right. Music had changed her husband's life by giving him a reason to keep going, a way to honor her memory, and a community that welcomed him back from his isolation. That's the real magic of music, not just the notes and rhythms, but the way it connects us to each other and to the people we've loved and lost. It's a language that speaks directly to the heart, transcending words and touching the places where we're most human. Mary Brennan knew that. And now, thanks to Harold's gift, thousands of children will continue to discover it for themselves. What an incredibly moving story about grief, redemption, and the power of honoring those we love through action rather than words. Harold's journey from angry neighbor to devoted supporter reminds us that behind every difficult person is often an untold story of pain. What did you think of the way Harold dealt with grief and how he transformed pain into tribute? Share in the comments below. If this story about unexpected kindness, healing through community, and the lasting impact of dedicated teachers touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more uplifting stories every day. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss our next heartwarming tale. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.